What would you say those of us who run really small businesses or we're freelancers or we're just starting out, what have you seen as the biggest struggles people have, biggest questions they have?
Bookkeeping is the one. It's actually, I would say it's more psychological than that. It starts with, but I'm just a freelancer, or I don't run a business. I just do this thing. Okay, you do that thing and that's great, but you are running a business. And if you're staying in the mindset of a business owner and making some just little tweaks to that and how you're operating things and setting up your own internal systems, there are a lot of benefits to running a business. And if you're organized with the thing that everyone hates, and especially once everybody starts to get busy and they're making money, it's generally the first thing anybody outsources is the bookkeeping. But it's still good to know how to do it, not just because taxes and IRS and you want to keep them happy, but that's as your business grows, that's how you make decisions. If you don't know where your money is coming from and where it's going, you don't really have what the information that you need to make the decision of, well, should I invest in this? Should I spend more time on this because I get more income from this avenue of my business? So it really kind of starts with the basics of bookkeeping. And then the other thing I would say is time management. Because suddenly you go from, well, most of us have worked for somebody else for so long, and then you are on your own. So that's great. It's freedom. It's like, wow, this is great. I can do whatever I want when I want. Yes, you can. But that just means that there are all these hours in the day, and you still have to figure out how you want to allocate those between work and personal time, and then your work hours between which projects and how you want to structure your day. Are you a morning person? Are you a night owl? There are just so many things that come into play. And I think a lot of people go to the internet and they think, okay, well, how do I be productive? And they might find all the millionaires out there who say, if you wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, then you can do this, this, and that. But if you don't wake up at 5 in the morning, Tara, we'll use you as an example. I cannot imagine you being awake at 5 a.m.
No, not sometimes if I'm up all night writing, that can happen. But yeah.
Yeah, so you're still up, not getting up. But if you're not a morning person, waking up at 5 a.m. is going to be a disaster. You're just going to waste the time that you should be sleeping trying to function, and that doesn't work. So unfortunately, you can't really Google the right answer. You have to figure out what's going to work for you specifically. And that's what I try to do with clients that I'm working with in that capacity. It's not about what works for me. What works for me is perfect for me, but some people look at me like, what? You do what? So no, it has nothing to do with me. It's figuring out your working style, when you have the most energy, how you need to focus your brain at certain times of the day. And really, it just takes a lot of paying attention to what you're doing and kind of being mindful of those things, which is difficult to do when you feel that you're busy and you have all the things to do. You don't want to have to sit there and keep a timer of, okay, well, from this time to this time, I did this and I felt this way. But you figure it out as you go for the most part.
Would you say you see a lot of creatives struggling with putting off all the admin and the boring stuff to focus on all of the income producing work? And what do you recommend to help them set aside time to do the boring admin stuff?
It's exactly what you just said. You have to set aside the time. And one of the biggest tricks is put it in a schedule. Set an alert, a reminder, and treat it like you would any other appointment. And it's like the people I just mentioned that are, in a panic now because they skipped a whole year's worth of bookkeeping. When you do that, then you have to your memory has to now go back a year and try to remember, well, what was that? Who did I eat with in this? Well, what did I buy from Amazon that day? Because it could have been anything. But if you dedicate, and if you're that far behind, now you need 10, 20 hours to catch up, and you have to do it. The IRS doesn't care that you were busy or that you put it off. They're not always the enemy, but they really don't care what your personal struggles are. They have deadlines and you have to meet those or you pay penalties. So it's much easier, whether it's an hour a week or a couple hours a month. I wouldn't go any longer than a month. But it's really just making yourself sit down and do it, because when it's a pile that's this big of things to do, it's much easier to tackle than when it's this big. And nobody wants to do it. I understand that, but it's just really kind of getting over it and saying, okay, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. So I'm going to put 1 hour in my calendar. I'm going to schedule it, and I am going to stick to that. I'm going to sit down in front of the computer and go through it and just get it done, and treat it that way. Almost like you are your own boss, but it's kind of like you're two separate people. And maybe if you need the boss, it's going to tell you, okay, you have to get this done by this time. I'm constantly making up deadlines for myself. Say, I need to get this thing done by this time. No one else is telling me to do that, but I work better in a structure where I have to have things done by a certain time. So, there's no reason I can't make up things. Even if I know that they're not real, I can still do it on my own.
Always helpful. I love Amanda's knowledge. I love it. So speaking of money, when I was just starting out, one of the things I really struggled with was figuring out what my rate should be. Just a place to start, not necessarily market value, but just as a start, how much do I need to live off per year? Where do I start? Do you have any advice around that?
It's hard because a lot of times if you're going to the Google for the information, especially starting off, if you're doing any kind of consulting or something, it just says, okay, well, figure out how much money you want to make for the year and then divide it by 12. And then that's how much you need to make per month. And that sounds great in theory, except for why would you put on a cap on how much you want to make every year? But the market value does come into play, because if everybody in the market is charging $100 an hour, and then you come in and say, well, I need to make this much, so I'm $350 an hour. You're probably not going to get that job or that work. But you do have to know, it's really difficult, because when you work for somebody else, you know how much money you're making every 2 weeks. You can budget. As a self-employed person, budgeting is really, really tricky, because there's a lot of fluctuation. You could have a really great month followed by a really slow month and a lot of just unknowns. So you really should have an idea of what your monthly minimum is, and that's how much do you actually have to pay. What are your expenses every month that you as a person have to pay? Your mortgage or rent, your utilities, groceries, all of the things that keep getting more expensive these days. And, on the business side, you have software, subscriptions. At home, you probably have all your TV stuff. It's just figuring out what all those expenses are, and then kind of figuring out, okay, this is the minimum that I have to make each month. So how am I going to do that? And then even separating those expenses of, okay, well, I would love to have all of these things. If it gets really slow for a little bit, I don't have to have 13 different TV subscription platforms. I can probably do without these. Or, there's little ways that you can cut things out if you need to, or figure out, well, I just need to make more money. And then it's making sure you're not undercharging, which is the mistake that a lot of people do in the beginning. It's really easy to do when you haven't been working yet and you just need the money. So I'll just do a job. I'm happy to have a client. I'll take whatever you want to give me. But if you set your rate too low to start, then you have to keep working for that rate. It's much harder to raise that, and sometimes then you end up working twice as hard for the same amount. And then if you're charging too little, you hurt everybody else that's doing the same work that you're doing, because then you get that client. It's like, oh, but I could get somebody on Fiverr who's going to do this for $50. I don't do anything for $50. And maybe there's something that makes sense for that, but it's being really mindful of how much you need to make, but also putting the same value on your time and realizing, okay, but if I take this job and it's going to take me 50 hours a week and they're paying me $20 an hour, that's going to eat up all my time. It's only going to make me this much money. And then I have no time left to find new clients, to develop new relationships. So every industry is going to have its own rate, and you're going to have your own needs. But again, I hate to say it, it comes back to your finances, the bookkeeping, knowing how much that you do need to make and figuring out how to do that. And I know for me, I have a balance of, I try to get a certain amount of monthly retainer work. So I have some regular income coming in each time. And then I have the one-off jobs that And, sometimes it's going to pay a flat amount for a certain amount of time or a few days, or however a project is structured. It's trying to find that balance of at least having some regular income you can rely on, and then figuring out what you can do and where to spend your time.